If you didn't feel old already, then you're about to. The John Cusack starring rom-com High Fidelity turns 20 years old at the end of March, an anniversary best celebrated by the recent release of the surprisingly decent Hulu spin-off TV series. Directed by Stephen Frears from a script co-penned by Cusack himself, the film isn't simply a spirited adaptation of Nick Hornby's 1995 novel, but one of the most passionate and entertaining movies about music ever made. And like any great movie, there are dozens of fascinating stories about its creation. From a certain veteran filmmaker who almost ended up making the movie, to a star-making performance that nearly didn't happen, and just how that insane Bruce Springsteen cameo came about. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and as we raise a glass to 20 years of High Fidelity, here are 20 facts you probably didn't know. Number 20. Jack Black almost turned down the role of Barry. Jack Black received heaps of praise for his supporting performance in the movie as Rob's lovably obnoxious employee Barry. Yet as difficult as it is to imagine anyone else in the role, things almost worked out very differently. Cusack, who co-wrote the movie script, adapted Barry to the screen with Black in mind to play the part, but Black, who was on the verge of breaking out into Hollywood, very nearly turned it down for unknown reasons. In the end, Black reconsidered and agreed to star, in turn delivering one of his best performances to date and one of the movie's most fondly remembered characters, damn near stealing the spotlight away from Cusack himself. Number 19. The writers listened to 2,000 songs while picking the soundtrack. With High Fidelity's intensely musical focus, it followed that the film's soundtrack needed to help set the appropriate mood. But because Rob and his pals are such musical snobs as Cusack himself suggests, Cusack and his co-writers agonized intensely over which songs to include. Ultimately, they listened to approximately 2,000 songs while seeking out the right tunes for the soundtrack, eventually settling on just shy of 70 songs to be included in the movie in one form or another. The end result was certainly worth all that toil though, given that the film's diverse soundtrack so thoroughly informs its overall identity. Still, that equates to around 100 hours spent working on the music alone. And entirely separate from this, if anyone knows how to get a job like this, then please leave a little comment down below, asking for a friend of course. Number 18. Nick Hornby's novel was set in London rather than Chicago. Nick Hornby's original 1995 novel of the same name was actually set in London, but the author had no qualms at all about the screenwriters ultimately deciding to shift the drama to Chicago. The decision was largely made due to their greater familiarity with Chicago culturally speaking. Cusack said, quote, "When I read the book, I knew where everything was in Chicago. I knew where the American Rob went to school and dropped out, where he used to spin records. I knew 2 or 3 different record shops when I was growing up that had a Rob, a Dick, and a Barry in them." End quote. The general feeling among the writers was that the change could be made without betraying the spirit of Hornby's book, and that ultimately proved to be true, as High Fidelity is less about its setting, but more the people and the music scene they inhabit. Number 17. Mike Newell was originally attached to direct. Before Stephen Frears came aboard as director, High Fidelity was originally acquired by Touchstone Pictures the very same year that Hornby's novel was released. During its initial 3 years of development, Mike Newell, best known for 4 Weddings and a Funeral and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, was in fact attached to direct, and it's easy to appreciate how his directorial sensibilities would have served the material well. But for reasons unknown, Newell ultimately didn't direct the project, though it was presumably an amicable enough departure given that he still received an executive producer credit on the final film. Number 16. The fourth wall breaking was inspired by Alfie. High Fidelity's memorable narrative conceit sees protagonist Rob frequently breaking the fourth wall to talk directly to the audience, in turn detailing his feelings and basically softening the edges of an otherwise quite prickly character. This wasn't originally part of the plan though, with Cusack adamantly insisting that having Rob talk to the camera would result in too much of him, even though his co-writers were keen on the idea, citing the Michael Caine starring classic comedy Alfie as an exceptional use of fourth wall breaks. Ultimately, Cusack was swayed when Frears came aboard as director and agreed that the meta angle would best serve the material. The rest, as they say, is history. Number 15. Bruce Springsteen's cameo was originally meant for Bob Dylan. Of the many fantastic moments in the movie, who could forget the legendary cameo appearance from none other than the boss himself, Bruce Springsteen. Springsteen appears as a vision before a downtrodden Rob, jamming on his guitar while bolstering Rob's decision to call up his ex-girlfriends, but the rock icon's involvement in the film wasn't originally part of the plan. Cusack actually wanted Bob Dylan for this part, but when he was unavailable, which they should have expected to be fair, they decided to write it with Springsteen in mind, hoping it might raise studio interest in the script despite having no idea if the boss would even accept the part. But helpfully, Cusack was an acquaintance of Springsteen's and so was able to pitch the idea directly. After reading the script, he agreed to do it, and the rest was an all-timer movie cameo. Number 14. It was John and Joan Cusack's 8th movie together. Believe it or not, but John Cusack and his sister Joan might have appeared together in more movies than any other pair of Hollywood siblings. Joan Cusack appears in the film as Liz, the thoroughly pissed-off best friend of Rob's ex-girlfriend Laura, and it in fact marks the 8th film they've starred in together. These 7 prior movies are Class, 16 Candles, Grandview USA, Broadcast News, Say Anything, Gross Point Blank, and Cradle Will Rock. It doesn't stop there though. Since the release of High Fidelity, they've appeared in 2 more movies together, Martian Child and War Inc. Number 13. Harold Ramis and Beverly D'Angelo both filmed cut cameos. The home video release of the movie includes almost 15 minutes of deleted scenes, the majority of which are well worth fans' time. The 2 standout scenes, however, see Hollywood legends Harold Ramis and Beverly D'Angelo making memorable cameo appearances. Ramis shows up for a whole half-minute as Rob's father, who dispenses some hilarious sex advice, while D'Angelo plays a jilted wife who wants to sell her cheating husband's record collection for a mere $50. Clearly, both of these scenes should have made the cut, even if the film's 113-minute runtime was probably already making the studio a tad twitchy. This was a comedy after all. Number 12. In the Hungarian dub, Barry and Rob discuss Reservoir Dogs instead of Evil Dead 2. Midway through the movie, Rob and Barry have a memorable exchange revolving around the splatter movie classic Evil Dead 2. But for the dubbed Hungarian release of the movie, this conversation was actually changed to Quentin Tarantino's heist masterpiece, Reservoir Dogs, because Hungarian audiences weren't much aware of what Evil Dead 2 even was. This wasn't just a random change though. Reservoir Dogs is actually the film name-dropped in the book version of this scene, so the dub was ultimately and weirdly more faithful to Hornby's source material. We'll assume that Cusack and his co-writers were just huge fans of Evil Dead then. Number 11. Nick Hornby was paid $500,000 for the rights to his book. Back when Touchstone first acquired the rights to Hornby's book, they paid the author a stonking $500,000 for the pleasure, obviously envisioning a considerable box office success on their hands. Ultimately, it didn't really pay off though, as the film grossed just $47.1 million against a sizable $30 million budget, with the cost itself likely being inflated due to the film's extensive soundtrack licensing. Still, High Fidelity endures as a cult classic 20 years later, and home video sales were presumably encouraging enough to make the recent High Fidelity TV series worthwhile. Number 10. Rob Black's book is a reference to John Cusack's high school. Viewers might remember that Rob has a small black notebook containing the phone numbers of all his ex-girlfriends, which is adorned with musical stickers that vaguely conceal that the book is actually a Chandler's assignment notebook. This is notable because the notebook was a required item for every student at Evanston Township High School, which Cusack himself attended as a youngster and graduated from in 1984. While there's no confirmation that the notebook is the very same one Cusack himself used as a student, it's still a cute little shout out to an institution which defined his formative years. Number 9. Tim Robbins made a cameo for one specific reason. Tim Robbins makes a brief but unforgettable cameo appearance in the movie as Ray, Laura's obnoxious new boyfriend who Rob naturally despises to the point that he imagines violently assaulting him numerous times. In an interview though, Robbins admitted that he took the cameo role despite the minimal pay on offer for one main reason. The makeup department promised to create a custom wig for him. Indeed, his greying mop of hair isn't Robbins' own doing, but rather a fitted prop, which, in fact, he was actually allowed to keep after filming Wrapped. Robbins also said that the same was true of his Anchorman cameo during the iconic cameo-filled newscaster brawl scene. Better yet, Robbins still has both wigs, and even continues to use them in his Halloween costumes. Number 8. Stephen Frears only agreed to direct because he wanted to work with John Cusack again. After being offered the directing gig, Stephen Frears read Hornby's novel and, despite enjoying it, felt that he simply didn't connect emotionally with the material because it wasn't about his generation, him having been born in 1941. But what ultimately convinced Frears to take the job was a desire to work with John Cusack once again. The two had previously teamed on the sublime 1990 neo-noir The Grifters, which starred Cusack and ultimately netted Frears a Best Director Oscar nomination. Frears also found the idea of shifting the novel's location to Chicago and inspired one and signed on the dotted line. Number 7. Tenacious D performed at the film's premiere party. The movie had its world premiere at Hollywood's historic El Capitan Theater, while the post-premiere party was held at LA's exclusive Sunset Room Club. For a movie like High Fidelity, you'd certainly expect a musical focus at the premiere, and true to form, Jack Black's band Tenacious D gave a performance for the partygoers. It's an especially interesting anecdote though, as despite forming in 1994, Tenacious D didn't actually break into the mainstream until the release of their self-titled 2001 debut album, released almost 18 months after High Fidelity hit screens. Number 6. John Cusack's father Dick cameos as a minister. Though John Cusack has a prominent supporting role in the film, another Cusack also shows up for a brief cameo, and that's the siblings' father Dick, who appears as a minister during the funeral for Laura's father. This was the second film that John, Joan, and Dick all appeared in, the first being 1983's comedy drama Class, and it's sadly also their last, as Dick passed away in 2003 at the age of 77. So consider all the times you've watched this movie and had no idea that Daddy Cusack was hidden in plain sight. Number 5. Stephen Frears had to stop Jack Black quitting. Twice. In addition to changing Cusack's mind about the movie's fourth wall breaks, Stephen Frears also had a hand in ensuring that Jack Black stayed aboard the film despite the actor's instincts telling him otherwise. Black reportedly tried to quit the movie 2 times, but Frears fought to keep him in. In his own words, quote, "Jack's a bolter, and I brought him back twice because I had faith in him. Sometimes you're amazed by the stuff you get," end quote. Quite why Black didn't have the full confidence in either him or the project is unknown, but thanks to Frears being able to corral him, we weren't deprived of a killer supporting performance. Number 4. Regina Spektor wrote her hit song Fidelity while watching the movie. Well, probably. Rather ironically, for a movie all about the love of classic music, High Fidelity has apparently also inspired the creation of new music as well. Regina Spektor's song Fidelity remains her most popular release to date, being both her first entry in the Billboard Top 100 and by far her most streamed song on Spotify. Those accolades, however, are reportedly all thanks to this film. Rumours have persisted since the song's release that Spektor wrote it while watching High Fidelity, and though we can't find a concrete source on this, the lovelorn lyrics certainly fit the film's themes well enough. Number 3. There are references to other John Cusack films. There are 2 major references to other John Cusack movies in High Fidelity, one of them absolutely intentional and the other almost definitely not. In the early scene when we visit Championship Vinyl for the very first time, the camera pans across the store's collection of records before holding on a distinctive album by the band Index. This isn't purely a coincidence though. Index was a short-lived garage rock band from the late 60s who formed in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. You might recall that Cusack also starred in the hilarious dark comedy Grosse Pointe Blank a few years prior to High Fidelity, and there's no way this wasn't a subtle nod to it. Also early in the film, Rob mentions having read the novel Love in the Time of Cholera, which actually serves as a major plot point in Cusack's rom-com Serendipity, as was released the year after High Fidelity. Given that the reference was also included in Hornby's 1995 novel though, it's fair to call that one a pretty big coincidence, even if it is certainly an amusingly well-timed one. Number 2. Laura quotes Shakespeare when she accepts Rob's marriage proposal. At the end of the movie, Rob makes an impulsive marriage proposal to Laura, who rather sarcastically accepts, declaring, "I do, I will." This might seem like just a playful enough quip, but it's actually quoted from a most unexpected source, William Shakespeare himself. To be more specific, it's taken from Henry IV Part 1, when in Act 2, Scene 4, Prince Henry says the very same affirmative to Falstaff. But unless you've brushed up on the bard recently, you've probably never even noticed. Number 1. Vintage Vinyl is a real record store from John Cusack's hometown. In one of the film's first few scenes, Rob greets his employee Dick, who mentions that he, quote, "found the first Licorice Comforts album over at Vintage Vinyl," end quote. It's first worth mentioning that the Licorice Comforts are not actually a real band, but a fake carryover from Hornby's novel. The record store Vintage Vinyl, however, is a real store located in Evanston, Illinois, which just so happens to be the hometown of, you guessed it, John Cusack himself. Better still, the store remains open to this very day. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Will you be watching High Fidelity for its 20th anniversary, and does that make you feel incredibly old? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Again, apologies for the current sound quality on these voiceovers. I'm literally recording this under a duvet because we're all working at home, but thank you for watching anyway. I've been Josh, and I'll see you soon.